Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
As we approach a year since the October 7th massacre, the Palestinians are pushing to single out Israel at the UN. But what does that really mean? Imagine rewarding the masterminds behind hostage-taking, rape, and murder. This isn't about peace or prosperity for the Palestinians. It's about empowering those who thrive on chaos. A diplomatic victory for the Palestinians at this moment would hand Hamas exactly what they want: more power, less reason to compromise, and a green light to keep terrorizing innocent people. The Palestinian leadership pushing for this resolution isn't working for peace. They're stalling real solutions and making things worse for the entire region. Is this really the path for peace?
Finding peace in Israel and the Middle East. Welcome back to Truth Thursday, and the Rob Maness Show is live on Worldview Tube and our X Spaces simulcast. Well, October 7th, 2023. Rocked the world. It marked the darkest day in Israel's 76-year modern history. On this day, a barbaric massacre orchestrated by Hamas, like you just saw in that opening video there, claimed the lives of over 1,400 innocent people, primarily Jewish civilians. These terrorists stormed homes. They mercilessly slaughtered women and children in their beds. They subjected other people to unimaginable brutalities, rape, torture, even desecrating the bodies of the dead in public. They took 254 civilians hostage. Simply put, October 7th was the worst day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust, and I would argue for the world. Since then, Israel has conducted war operations to eliminate Hamas, rightly so, from Gaza, while under attack from Iran and its proxy forces in Yemen, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and the West Bank. The savages that opened the war box on October 7th have executed hostages, including Americans, and have refused any attempts to end the war they started. The United States policy toward the situation can only be doomed to failure as we see endless attempts to force Israel into a one-sided agreement that Hamas won't agree to, and the use of supply withholding tactics against Israel for war supplies. The war on Israel by Iran won't end when it is getting signals that the United States of America doesn't really support our ally like it's getting. The great challenge of our time is finding peace in this conflict, and it continues to elude everyone. New ideas and solutions are desperately needed. And my guest today is the author of One Jewish State, the Last Best Hope to Resolve the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict. And as the U.S. ambassador to Israel from March 2017 until January 2021, Ambassador David Friedman successfully guided the unprecedented diplomatic advancements in the U.S.-Israel relationship, including moving the embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and he was a key architect of the Abraham Accords, the highly successful peace agreements with Arab nations and normalization. Ambassador Friedman, welcome to the Rob Maness Show, sir.
Thank you, Colonel. Great to be with you. Appreciate it very much.
Oh, thank you so much for agreeing to come on. As you saw in the opening monologue and the video clip, more people around the world than just Israelis and Jewish people living in Israel or citizens of Israel understand what's going on. What I don't get, though, I guess I'll just lead this discussion off with this. The clip talked about the United Nations. They passed a resolution in the last 24 hours that essentially says Israel has to commit suicide.
Look,
Why do we have this?
The United Nations is just a failed entity. It's very frustrating to watch. I mean, look, they've been a failure, for generations. They don't stop wars. They exacerbate wars. They have an obsession with Israel. I mean, the United Nations Human Rights Council has only one permanent item on its agenda, right? It's Israel violations of human rights. This is a council with, that's been led from time to time by China, by Russia, by Iran, and the only issue that they can all agree upon is that Israel is a violator of human rights. I mean, it's almost comical. And these resolutions, they're very disappointing. If you remember in the waning days of the Obama administration, they passed a resolution that all of Judea and Samaria, Israel's biblical heartland, including the Western Wall, was illegally occupied by Israel. Illegally occupied from who? The Palestinians have never had a country. The only parties that were there before were Jordan. Jordan gave up all its rights in 1994. Before that, the Brits, they gave up all their rights, 1948. The Ottoman Empire, they were there for a few hundred years, gave up their rights after World War I. Who could Israel be occupying it from? No one ever had it before. It's just maddening. The UN is a colossal failure, and I hope that President Trump comes in and really kind of shakes it up. At some level, we need to seriously consider just shutting it down.
Yeah, I've called for that myself. I've run political campaigns for U.S. Senate twice, and that's been part of my platform is eliminating the UN because it is such a failure. Explain to folks this idea of occupation. When I read the resolution, I was recalling over the last year a lot of discussion amongst people that really weren't familiar with the situation in Gaza, going, well, they're occupying Gaza, but Israel hadn't occupied the Gaza Strip in 20 years. They gave it back to the Palestinian people that lived there. But this resolution, I think you touched on it there, was about much more than to do with just Gaza, right?
Look, there's a lot to unpack in that question. I mean, occupation itself is the wrong word for Israel's presence in Judea and Samaria. Obviously, as you point out, there hasn't been a Jew, an Israeli, or a soldier on the ground there in Gaza for 18 years leading up to the war. So that's just wrong. I mean, no matter how you define occupation, it's just wrong to say that Israel's there, because they're not. The other side of Israel, on the eastern side, there's this kind of wisdom that everybody seems to subscribe to, that Israel's occupying, the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. Now, as I kind of alluded to, you only occupy something when your entitlement to be there is limited to the fact that you conquered it. That's what makes you an occupier. You didn't have a right to be there. You took your military, you conquered it, and then you have the obligations of military occupation. You know this just as well as me. The obligations of military occupation you then have to observe, but that only applies if you conquered it. Israel didn't conquer the West Bank. The entirety of it was earmarked for Israel, by the League of Nations in the San Remo Declaration in 1920. And of course, Israel's ancient entitlement to this biblical land, places like Shiloh and Bethel and Jerusalem and Hebron and Bethlehem. I mean, its rights to this property goes back longer than any other nation to any other land in the world. I mean, it's all part of the God's covenant to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So this idea that Israel's an occupier generally is not true. I mean, it's just not the case. Yeah. And then you kind of overlay that. Well, so since Oslo, roughly half of the West Bank has been governed by the Palestinians, not by Hamas, but by the Palestinian Authority. And they've managed to do just about as bad a job as Hamas. I mean, they have a pension system where they actually incentivize people to go out and kill Jews. If you kill a Jew, you get a higher pension than if you don't. If you kill 2 Jews, you get more than if you kill 1 Jew. If you're killed in the process of killing a Jew, your family gets stipends. These are amounts that you couldn't get, going to work. So these are terrorist organizations. In the case of the PA, dressed up to look like something more. They're sitting now at the UN. Abu Mazen will give a speech at the UN, but they're terrorists. They pay They pay terrorists to kill Jews, and they incite violence, and they have no interest whatsoever of living in peace with Israel. But the UN sees it differently, and it's because of that warped view that we won't see peace in this region along the lines of what the UN is contemplating.
Do you think the UN types and Hezbollah, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad folks, of course Hamas, and Iran in general, the Iranians in general, are emboldened when they hear things like just today, the Secretary of Defense Austin was quoted as saying he fears there's going to be a war in southern Lebanon, when the Hezbollah people in southern Lebanon started firing missiles and rockets at Israel on October 8th, 2023, and basically entered this war, didn't they?
They entered the war. They caused the displacement of over 100,000 Israeli citizens in the north who had to get out of the way of the rocket fire. I'm so grateful that over the last couple of days, finally, Israel's fighting back. They said at the beginning, we don't want to go to war with Hezbollah. They said to the United States, look, you guys are so confident you can bring together a peace deal. It's very simple. Have the army retreat from the border, create a buffer zone so that we can send people back to their homes where they can sleep at night and not worry about what happened on October 7th happening to them. Just move them back. Israel has no territorial aspirations towards any part of Lebanon. So they said to America, look, you don't want to war. We don't want to war. Go deliver it. And the U.S. under this administration is the most feckless, the most impotent I've ever seen. I mean, they go there and they beg. They beg the Iranians and they beg Hezbollah. They didn't cut off $1 of funding to Iran. Iran, when we left office, had a GDP of under $200 billion. Their GDP is now over $450 billion because we don't enforce sanctions on Iranian oil sales to Russia and China. So they didn't stop any of that. They put no pressure on them, and they just said, please don't do this. And on top of that, they sent this guy, Hochstein, a year and a half ago, before the war started, to try to settle a maritime dispute, a dispute about who had better claims to some gas fields in the Eastern Mediterranean. I worked on that when I was ambassador. We were talking about somewhere between 50-50 and 60-40 kind of being the right way to settle this thing. And Hochstein shows up and he convinces the caretaker government of Israel to give it all away. 100% was given to Lebanon. It was supposed to bring peace. It did nothing. It was predictably going to do nothing, but it did nothing to reduce the tensions. And of course, as soon as Hezbollah had a chance, they started a war against Israel. So a lot of this falls on American failed foreign policy.
Oh, it certainly does. Well, sir, we've got a question from our live audience that I allow our host over there, Shell. Shell, go ahead with the question.
Go ahead, caller.
I suppose that's me. So, Dr. Friedman, the Abraham Accords, while the crowning achievement, were not the only huge win that the Trump administration had in negotiations over there. Was there a commonality, a common thread between all those different wins that could be leveraged against, that could be leveraged for this situation that does not entail cutting out Iran from the picture?
Well, look, I think you're right that the Abraham Accords was the ultimate end of a policy in which the U.S. stood shoulder to shoulder with Israel and didn't permit any daylight. So whether it was moving the embassy to Jerusalem, or the Golan Heights, or changing policy that Jews could live anywhere they wanted to in Judea and Samaria, all the pundits said, you're going to create endless wars and irreconcilable conflicts, and actually we proved the opposite. Why do we prove the opposite? Because the Gulf nations, whether it's the UAE or Bahrain, or whether it's Morocco, to the west, or whether it's Saudi Arabia, which would have been a partner by now had we not left office, they want to see a strong Israel. I mean, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for a rock-solid relationship between America and Israel, because Israel is the strongest moderate army in the region. And they have a common enemy. Their common enemy is Iran. So the idea here, all these countries are saying, look, how do we get in on this circle of trust between America and Israel? We want to be part of it, and that's how the Abraham Accords came to be. It's a informal, if you will, informal alliance among moderate nations in the Middle East, most of them Muslim, one Jewish, but nonetheless with a common set of values to fight radical Islamic extremism, both Sunni and Shiite. Now, look, Iran, is the head of the snake. I mean, there's no other way to put it. It funds terrorism from the Houthis to Hezbollah to Hamas to Islamic Jihad. It funds it all, and they were broke when we left office. I mean, not only did we sanction them into near bankruptcy, but we killed Qasem Soleimani, who was the architect of all their terrorist activities. The best outcome is for us not to go to war with Iran. I hope that's not necessary. But if Trump gets in, to go out and shut down their sales of oil to all our adversaries, to bring them back to the point of bankruptcy, to incentivize the people of Iran, who generally speaking don't like their leadership, to incentivize them to overthrow their rulers and to help as we can. And then to hopefully, if Iran became a non-aligned party, the whole world would change. And I think that's really, the long-term goal with Iran. There is no, with the current mullahs in Iran, there's nothing that can be done other than to make them miserable.
Exactly right, sir. Well, Ambassador, we've got to take a commercial break here, but when we come back, we'll see a little clip talking about the lack of communication between Israel and the United States over what I'm calling, a lot of other people are calling Operation Grim Beeper, the pager operation, which is a modern day exceptional military Trojan horse operation. We'll be right back with former ambassador to Israel for the United States, David Friedman, right here on the Rob Maness Show.
Scott, you're up.
I just want to start by applauding and congratulating Israel for exploding all the pagers today that were being worn by these Hezbollah terrorists. I was reading some information about this, and one thing that stuck out to me is that Israel did not tell its ally, the United States, what it was doing before it did that. And it made me wonder, what is it about the Biden administration that would say to Israel, maybe we ought not tell these people? So my hot take is, good job, Israel. And what is going on that they don't think the United States is trustworthy to be on something as cool as that?
It's called.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's Truth Thursday here on Worldview Tube, and our X Space is simulcast. And my guest today is President Trump's ambassador to Israel, Dr. David Friedman, who is also the author of a great new book, and it's about the one Jewish state and how that's the path to peace. And we're going to get into that here in a second, Dr. Friedman. But sir, are you as concerned as the old military guy in me is about the lack of communication and trust between Israel's military and intelligence services and America's, as highlighted by that clip right there?
Yeah, I am. And I think you know this, and certainly I experienced this. When I was in office, the relationship between the Israeli military and the American military, from the guys, in the fields to the guys who, doing all the intel work, it was really hand in glove. I mean, they were so closely connected, so much mutual respect and admiration that each side had for the other. And they worked together. It was a great partnership. And I'm really concerned that the Israelis don't feel that they can confide in America the way they used to. Now, anybody, anybody who thinks this was not a good idea, ought to have their head examined. I mean, the criticism of Israel has been, that they kill too many civilians when they kill terrorists. The truth is they don't. And this was done. West Point took a look at this. John Spencer looked at this, concluded that Israel, even in Gaza, is doing incredible work to avoid civilian casualties. But here in Lebanon, I mean, you're talking about the ratio of terrorists to civilians being killed is like, 1,000 to 1. I mean, almost all of them, with rare exceptions, almost all the casualties are Hezbollah terrorists. And to do this in a way which was, so skilled and so clever, and to do it the next day all over again, to the point where now, the terrorists, they don't know what they can turn on. They're afraid to make a pot of coffee. They're afraid to step on a scale. They just don't know what's booby-trapped. And I mean, they've got their enemy in such an incredible spot, without putting a single soldier at risk. We ought to be applauding this. I mean, Biden should be getting up there and thanking Israel for doing this. They should be congratulated. So yeah, the fact that this was something controversial that Israel felt they couldn't share with America is very, very, very disturbing.
It is very, very disturbing. I'm not surprised that you think so too. The interesting thing is that America is calling for Israel to de-escalate based on this operation, but as I mentioned in my monologue, I mean, the war started between Hezbollah and Israel on October 8th this time around. I mean, obviously there's been tit for tat kind of stuff going on for decades, but it really started in earnest there. I don't see where the United States comes off as asking Israel to de-escalate when they're really trying to get the situation under control. And this operation, I think it will go down as a historical operation, and in 1,000 years, young warriors will be studying this like the Trojan horse operation on Troy studied, and those kinds of battles and those things, because it is precise, it is discriminating in such a way that I'm not aware of any civilians being targeted at all, and there just isn't very much reporting on civilian deaths or severe injuries, but there's a lot of reporting about deaths and injuries on specifically the Hezbollah fighters, the command and control network. Even the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon was carrying one of these pagers, and their command and control system is completely wrecked, right?
It's wrecked, and what's really interesting about it is that, Hassan Nasrallah, who runs Hezbollah, he got wind of the fact that, the smartphones were very easy to target. So, and in fact, Israel had assassinated some very high-level Hezbollah leaders by following their smartphones. So Nasrallah gave an order saying nobody use smartphones anymore. We're going to order 5,000 kind of old technology pagers, because he was confident that the pagers couldn't be targeted. And so he goes and puts in an order for 10,000 of these things, and lo and behold, the order gets sent to a factory controlled by Israel. That Israel kind of faked the factory and took it over and built these pagers with just a little bit of explosive devices right next to the battery that could be triggered, and they then sold these these dumb phones, these dumb technology, and Nasrallah was totally confident that this stuff couldn't be targeted, and in fact, it was used to kill or to maim or to disable 5,000 terrorists. So yeah, it's an unbelievable accomplishment. But the other thing, Rob, is look, Israel doesn't want this war. They didn't want this war. This war was thrust upon them first by Hamas and then by Hezbollah. The U.S. has been interjecting itself into the discussion for almost a year. Biden doesn't want a war, not because he cares about the war. He cares about the politics. He thinks that yet another war before the election will simply demonstrate further their ineptitude in terms of international affairs. So that's what it's about. And Israel says, look, we don't want to make trouble for you. You want to go stop this? It's very simple. We got 100,000 people that are out of their homes because they're getting shot upon. Let them come home. Let's get some assurances that Hezbollah won't attack. Push them back sufficiently far enough along the borders so that we don't have to worry about these mortars being shot. We'll deal with the Iron Dome, but the mortars are pretty hard to stop. And that was it. It wasn't like Israel said we want to have 10% of Lebanon, 20% of Lebanon. It wasn't like Putin going into Crimea or into Ukraine. And America couldn't deliver. That's the bottom line. America could not deliver this under any circumstances, notwithstanding America's massive leverage in this region, military leverage, diplomatic leverage, and mostly economic leverage. They could not deliver a deal. And now they're saying to Israel, don't escalate. Well, it's been a year, and the Israeli population is saying to their leader, saying to their military, we got 100,000 people out of our homes. We've ceded territory, to our enemy. We want it back. Just get us our territory back. And the Israeli leadership has no choice but to do that.
Absolutely right, Ambassador. I mean, it's folks. You probably don't remember this, but what the ambassador said is exactly right. We said, "Oh, we'll take care of this. We can make sure that things stay peaceful, etc." We have these capabilities. We move forces around. We've even moved so many carriers into this region and the Persian Gulf that we don't have a carrier in the Indo-Pacific right now, where a lot of us think our main adversary is in the world, the Communist Chinese Party over there. And we couldn't get the job done. So now we whine and point fingers at Israel for escalating when it's not really an escalation. Do you think that this operation is a precursor to a larger operation, or is it an attempt to reset to Hezbollah and Iran and say, look, guys, we're so far into your systems and your organizations that this is just a glimpse of what we are going to do to you if this doesn't stop?
I don't think it's a glimpse. I think this is a war. I think they got 5,000 terrorists that are wounded, that are off the playing field. They got the entire Hezbollah army demoralized. They got Nasrallah not knowing what light switches he can turn on. They're completely confused. Now's the time. They got to go in. They got to end this war. Do it decisively. And all they need and just let Nasrallah just surrender. Move back. 10, 15 kilometers back to the Litani River, so they don't threaten Israel anymore. Israel will then stop in a bit. But this is the time. They can't play footsie with these guys anymore. They got to do it. And look, I would point out, just a little bit of history that your viewers may not be aware of. But there was a war in 2006, also started by Hezbollah. They shot, at that point, extremely powerful rockets into Israel, forced a lot of people into bunkers. There was a ceasefire, and everybody kind of returned to their side. And then the United Nations Security Council passed a resolution, 1701, which appointed an organization called UNIFIL, United Nations Interim Forces in Lebanon. And UNIFIL's job, their only job, was to make sure that Hezbollah did not rearm. Hezbollah, as a part of this ceasefire agreement, agreed they would not rearm. And UNIFIL, the United Nations again, their job under this resolution was to make sure that Hezbollah did not rearm. And how good a job did they do? They enabled under their nose Hezbollah to rearm to the point where they have they are the most powerful non-state actor in the entire world, most powerful terrorist organization in the world, all under the nose of the United Nations, which was tasked with the job of making sure that didn't happen.
Yeah, they have massive logistical lines of communications into the government of Syria, across Iraq, into the government of Iran, that have brought all of these weapons in and increased their capability to the point where you're exactly right, sir. Well, we got to take another break. When we come back, though, I want to dive into the book and the concept of the book, The One Jewish State, which is something I happen to agree with. I think the two-state policy is a failure. I want to get your take on why that is and why this is the right move when we come back. And we'll have a little clip from Anthony Blinken, and it won't surprise you what he says when we come back. We'll be right back on the Rob Maness Show. It's Truth Thursday with former U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Dr. David Friedman.
All right, everybody.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Melissa and I have been taking Bella Grace, this powerful elixir, since last fall, 2023. The results have been amazing. My hands would crack and bleed, deep cuts and cracks every winter for years. No matter what we did, we couldn't get them to stop cracking and bleeding. This year, I took Bella Grace, no cracking, no bleeding. My acid reflux, gone. Haven't had to take a Pepsid. My hair growth, the last 2 times I had my hair cut, the lady had to use thinning shears on my hair. That's amazing. We've also received incredible feedback from you, our listening audience, and the impact it's had for you. This is loaded with astaxanthin. That's a powerful antioxidant. Collagen, but top grade collagen. Studies show 95% of it is being absorbed in the body because of the way they develop it. Then we have something called cat's claw. That's an anti-inflammatory from a vine in Peru. It's the bark, and it's an anti-inflammatory. There are about 80 clinical trials on Bella Grace. Please get a subscription now and save. MelissaHousebg.com.
With regard to the attack, look, the first thing that's usually important to underscore is the essential, vital, imperative work of humanitarians in Gaza and, for that matter, around the world. And it's essential that those activities be protected and indeed be facilitated. We need to see humanitarian sites protected, and that's something that we continue to raise with Israel. At the same time, we continue to see Hamas hiding in, taking over, and otherwise using these sites from which to conduct its operations and to pose an ongoing threat. And that, of course, has to stop because those actions are endangering civilians. I think it also underscores, once again, the urgency of reaching a ceasefire, because that's the best way of ensuring that we have a genuinely protected space throughout Gaza, a space in which the humanitarians can not only continue to do their work, but massively increase it to the benefit of people who desperately need it, the children, the women and men of Gaza.
Thursday, and my guest today is former U.S. Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, under the Trump administration. And Ambassador, Blinken there, Secretary Blinken, he kind of covers all the weak bases of the Biden administration's messaging on this issue. Oh, we have to protect humanitarian targets. He was complaining about humanitarian site workers that were killed in an attack, an air attack on Hamas by the Israeli Air Force. But the point is that he goes on to try to say, well, yeah, and Hamas has got to stop using this, but he leaves out a key piece of information. When you are using a church or a school or a hospital or a humanitarian site as a military operation target, which is what Hamas is doing consistently, regardless of, and I'm just so tired of the half information so that they can stay on some political message when it just doesn't fit with reality. And I think it just emboldens not only the enemies of Israel, but the enemies of the United States.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Not only, it's mostly this. America's role in this war has been almost entirely political. It's been simply to try to thread needles to try to placate both sides of the conflict. They frankly have satisfied nobody. And you're right. I mean, Hamas commits double war crimes every single day. They shoot rockets into civilian territories, and then they hide behind their own civilians, and they become an appropriate target under international law when they do that. On top of that, because Israel's getting so much pressure from the United States and wants to maintain a good relationship, Israel has adjusted its battle plans in ways to really, at the expense of the safety of their own soldiers, have minimized the civilian casualties. I said earlier, John Spencer at West Point says that no country's done more to minimize civilian casualties under these circumstances than the state of Israel. But the but what Biden keeps doing is trying to handcuff Israel. They do it publicly. They show up in the war cabinet, from time to time and give a speech. But you remember the whole thing about going into Rafah, where Kamala Harris says, I've read the maps, as if there's something like complicated here. I mean, I could have written that map on a napkin, for her. But this idea that somehow, they know better than Israel how to win this war. If Israel hadn't gone into Rafah, they wouldn't have been able to rescue the 5 hostages that they did. They wouldn't have discovered the massive smuggling tunnels between Gaza and Egypt, which was the source of most of the weapons that they were trying to interdict. So, Israel has to fight this war on its own. The war would have been over by now, probably 4 or 5 months ago, had Israel simply been allowed to win the war, destroy Hamas and move on. And the poor hostages, every time Biden or Blinken or Harris get up and say, free the hostages, the price goes up. They're not helping. They're not helping at all. They make Sinwar the Hitler-esque, leader of Hamas. They just embolden him. Can you imagine this guy? This guy's a complete nothing, a zero. He was in an Israeli prison, let go during the Shalit exchange. He had a brain tumor that the Israelis, for whatever reason, took him into a hospital and cured him of brain cancer. And this guy comes out and he's a zero, and he's been made into one of the great world leaders. Every time Blinken says, well, Mr. Sinwar, needs to do this or that. I mean, they're treating him like he's a world leader. He's a thug. And every time he hears this, he just makes it less likely that he's going to release the hostages because he loves the attention he's getting.
Yeah, it's incredible. People kind of chuckle about some of this stuff, but this is deadly serious, sir. Deadly serious. In the United States, by extending the war, they're also killing more civilians. You mentioned the Israeli forces, of course. They're having to be put in more danger, but more civilian casualties are being created by the United States' feckless approach to this whole situation. Well, but one of the things that this war has done specifically since October 7th is kind of ripped the Band-Aid off and shown that the two-state solution that all these liberals have been pushing for decades now really is doomed to fail. And you go into this in your book, and you talk about the true history of Jews and Muslims in the disputed territories and the state of Israel. And I think that, tell the folks how you do that and why, because I think that gets at why a two-state solution just is not workable, as exposed by the Hamas operation. Well,
I think it's important to know who the Palestinians are. I mean, you need to know who they are. Not everybody's the same. And certainly, post October 7th, we now have the clarity that we didn't have before. Paid too high a price for this clarity, but we have the clarity of knowing that a two-state solution won't work because, look, there hasn't been a Jew, as we said earlier, hasn't been a Jew in Gaza in 18 years. They were given lots of money, lots of opportunity. They were left to themselves, and they took all the money from the world and built terror tunnels and weapons of mass destruction instead of hospitals and schools and roads and things like that. So they failed the test, and they're failing the test in the West Bank as well, with the PA, which has all kinds of hotbeds of terror that routinely attack the Jewish people. But who are these people? Look, the short answer, without getting too deep into the weeds, the short answer is this: the Palestinians came along in the 1960s, right? I mean, prior to 1948, there was an area called Palestine. It wasn't a country; it was an area. It was controlled by the Turks, by the Ottoman Empire, and there were Jews living there, and there were Arabs living there. So you could either be a Palestinian Jew or you could be a Palestinian Arab. 1948 comes along, and the state of Israel is created, and so the state of Israel is now, the nationality of the Jews. So, for about 10, 15 years, it continued that way. And then Yasser Arafat came along, and he was, if you will, I think he was a terrorist, but he was also a great marketing genius, right? And he said, "I'm speaking for the Palestinians." Who does that mean? You're speaking for the Jews? No, I'm speaking for the Palestinians. There are no Jewish Palestinians. The Palestinians are the people of Palestine who've been subjugated for hundreds and hundreds of years. Just made up a whole story, and ignored the fact, for example, that the territory of Palestine had by that point been split up. 72% had been given to Jordan, and so there was a Palestinian state. 72% of Palestine was used to create Jordan. Now, and Jordan to this day is 60% Palestinian Arab. It happens to be ruled by a non-Palestinian. That's not Israel's fault. But what you have is this Palestinian brand that got created. And here's the most important thing, Rob. They were never a liberation. They called themselves the Palestinian Liberation Organization, but they were never about liberation. They were never about creating their own state, about creating a government, self-governance. They never had had discussions about, are we going to be a democracy, a republic? How are we going to elect our leaders? What kind of values are we going to promote? Human dignity, human rights, freedom of religion. None of that. No Thomas Jeffersons, no Alexander Hamiltons, or in the case of Israel, no Ben Gurions or Chaim Weizmanns. I mean, just the whole goal of the movement was to destroy Israel. That's all they've ever been about. Never about liberating themselves, always about destroying the Jewish state. And they're that way today. That's all they are today. And that's why they fail. That's why they failed in Gaza. That's why they failed in the West Bank. They don't have the ability to self-govern because they have no interest in self-governance. And most importantly, the people that live there, and I got to know a lot of them when I was ambassador. After a couple of years, I was sort of given my whole area responsibility then started to include all these territories. I got to know them. They don't want to live under Palestinian rule. That's the last thing they want. They understand how corrupt their leaders are. They understand how brutal, how ruthless they are. And you know what they see? They see the state of Israel, which is 20% Arab, right? And the 20% Arab that live in the state of Israel, they just hit the lottery, right? They happened to be on the good side of the Green Line when the war ended. So they became citizens of Israel. Now, more than 20% of the elite universities in Israel, the best schools, the Technion, Haifa University, Hebrew University, Tel Aviv University, more than 20% of the students are Arab. They've achieved the pinnacle of law, business, commerce, trade, medicine. That's what they want. And you know what? They're getting it under Israeli rule, not under Palestinian rule. So they're not stupid. I mean, this is a very small area, and the Palestinians living in the West Bank understand the options. And if they could say it freely, they can't because it's a ruthless, brutal dictatorship. But if they could say it freely, candidly, they would say, bring Israel in. We'd love to have them come in. Let them come in. Let them export all the values and all the systems and all the, all the technology and all the wisdom that they've created. Let them bring it to us, and we'll all do business together, and we'll all have a better life. That's the reality. But it's the dirty secret that the Palestinian leadership will never let out.
Yeah, if you look at the original, historical borders of the land of Israel, it encompasses all of this territory, and there weren't just Jewish people living there. Even in the original historical kingdom of Israel, and they weren't fighting in a civil war against each other either, for the most part. I mean, obviously, it's a long time ago, and there's been thousands of years past. So you had some conflict, I'm sure. So historically, it just makes sense to go for a one Jewish state option that can help people become, especially Arab people in that area, become that 20% that you're talking about, Mr. Ambassador. Well, we got more hands over in our live audience. I'd like to take a question from over there real quick. Go ahead, Shel.
We have AJ, sir.
Thank you very much for the mic, Shel. Colonel Maness, thank you. Ambassador Freeman, sir. A genuine fear of mine is a successful relocation of the hostages that Hamas still hold, which include Americans. From your chair, sir, what are the realities, given the current state of affairs between now and November elections? With that, I yield. Thank you very much.
That's a good question.
The situation is dire. We saw after the most recent cold-blooded murder of 6 hostages, the Army took us on a tour of where they were living. They were living in a tunnel 70 feet underground, 4-foot ceiling, and a 1.5-foot wide passageway. That's where they were living for what may have been almost a year. Imagine that, living, no sunlight, almost no ventilation, no sanitary facilities, no running water, no bathrooms, like the most abused animals. That's how they were living. The rest of them, I'm just assuming, are in horrible circumstances as well. I think the best chance for Israel to recover them is by putting the most military pressure as possible on Hamas and somehow being able to hold some captives and trade for it. But right now, what's happening right now, unfortunately, is the negotiations are being mangled because the pressure is being put on Israel, not on Hamas. I mean, there's no pressure being put on Qatar, no pressure being put on Egypt, no pressure being put on Jordan. It's all being to Israel to agree to stuff, and it hasn't been, resulting in much in anything. I mean, Sinwar is just going to continue to try to raise the price. There is a chance, and I share your fear, that because of these tunnels into Egypt, now Israel's covered most of them, but somehow through these tunnels to Egypt, they could be taken out into Egypt and then off to who knows where. But it's a heartbreaking circumstance, and we don't know how many are still alive. We don't know their condition, but we're assuming, very dire circumstances. And I think the more, I believe that, it's not, the ceasefire doesn't come from Israel, waving a white flag. The ceasefire comes from the Hamas